We have some amazing speakers for you at the 2014 Women's Conference. We have a marvelous keynoter today. We even have a United States Senator, so what's not to love about that, right? So I do want to take a moment to thank some of the companies and organizations that have made this day possible. And this is really important because great events like this only happen when we have strong corporate citizens who are willing to step up and help make this an opportunity for you to enjoy. So bear with me because you should know all of these names, patronize these businesses and organizations because they've made it possible for you to be here today. Of course, my good colleagues at Old Dominion University have done an amazing job of setting everything up. I'm going to read you the rest of this list, and you can hold your applause, or we will not be getting to the third session. You know, that's how that's going to be. Anthem, Blue Cross and Blue Shield, B2C Enterprises, the good folks at Bon Secours Virginia Health System, Cigna, Dominion, Genworth, Master Your Card Virginia, Newport News Shipbuilding, the City of Norfolk, the Port of Virginia, SAK Winter Media, Centera Health System, and the Virginia Community College System. Please give them a rousing round of applause. I am so happy to introduce to you, on behalf of the City of Norfolk, the very fine Vice Mayor of the City of Norfolk, Angela Williams, who brings us greetings.
So good morning. Good morning. All right, Kathy woke you guys up. That's great. It is truly an honor to be here on behalf of the City of Norfolk and our Mayor, Paul Frame, along with those who work with me and labor with me in the calling of public service. I greet you and I welcome you, all of those who are Norfolk residents. It's great to have you on the Old Dominion campus. And those of you who are not Norfolk residents, it is wonderful to have you in our great and fine, fabulous, wonderful, and exciting City of Norfolk. Thank you so much for being here. I just want to say to all of the ladies who are here, I do also give you kudos for being here and taking time out for yourselves. Many times as women, we take the time to do things for everyone else. Family, children, work projects, church, sororities, and extracurricular activities, community activities, but we rarely take the time to do something for ourselves. So this is your me time. And I want to say to you today, take the time to love yourself, take the time to educate yourself, and take the time to chart your own passport. We do, again, put everything and everyone else first, but I'll tell you something. I happen to love a mortician. And what that means is, I do, for those of you who know me, you know what I'm talking about. And so I've seen a lot of dead people. And you know what people say as the person is laying out in the casket? Oh, she was really a nice lady. She did so much for so many people, and then they go on about their business. And if you don't take the time to invest in yourself, you'll be laid out across that casket and someone will be saying, she was such a nice lady. She did so much stuff. Senator Warner will be sending a letter congratulating all the fine things that you did for the community. And you know what? Everybody else will move on with their lives. So take the time to love yourself. Take the time for yourself and enjoy today. Thank you. They gave me instructions and I didn't follow them. So now, we will have the presentation of the colors by the Naval Station Norfolk Color Guard, followed by the National Anthem, which will be brought to us by our own little songbird, Delores, Dee Dee.
say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rockets' red glare, the bombs bursting mid-air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say, does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the
You set that bar pretty high, didn't you? As our color guard retires, we should let you know that Old Dominion University hosts one of the largest and most distinguished ROTC units in the entire country. So please join me in giving them a round of applause. Please be seated. Well, I think you can tell we have already hit a high note. Well done. Well done. And we also invite you to tweet throughout the course of the morning. And if I knew how to tweet, here's what I would tweet. Here's what I would tweet. I love a mortician. Wouldn't you just? There's your line. Well, we're getting off to a great start this morning. I am so glad to have the opportunity to introduce to you the First Lady of Old Dominion University. Kate Broderick, long before she became the First Lady of Old Dominion University, has had a long and distinguished career in advocating for people with education issues and accessibility issues. She is a thought leader on that issue, has presented many papers, and has worked very hard on behalf of students at this university in that regard. She serves as well on the Virginia State Rehabilitation Council, and for really what is a lifetime of work around helping make education more accessible. She was honored in 2012 by the Virginia Center for Inclusive Communities with their Humanitarian Award. So ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming the First Lady of Old Dominion University, Kate Broderick.
Good morning. On behalf of the 28,000 faculty, staff, and students, welcome to Old Dominion University. We are honored to have Senator Warner host the 2014 Virginia Women's Conference on our campus. This event features a variety of conversations important to all of us. While you're here, I hope you take some time to look around. It's an exciting time, from the state-of-the-art classrooms and labs to our research breakthroughs to the energy of our students on display 24/7 at the Strome Entrepreneurial Center. Our long-standing commitment to inclusion, diversity, and actively engaging women with the university continues to draw top talent. Faculty members such as Sherry Goldberg-Ox in exercise science, Carolyn Rutledge in nursing, Sherry Reynolds in writing, and Eileen Hoffman in oceanography are known as the best and brightest in their fields. Two of our current students landed coveted intern positions at the White House this past summer. The university's first Rhodes Scholar, Truman Fellow, and U.S. Academic All-American were all women. I know there are many exciting discussions during the course of the conference, and I wish you a fruitful learning experience. It is now my distinct pleasure to introduce the host of today's event, Senator Mark Warner. Senator Warner spent 20 years as a successful technology and business leader in Virginia before he was elected to public office. Excuse me. While serving as Virginia's governor, he brought business efficiency, launched innovative education reforms, and led an economic development effort that created nearly 130,000 new jobs across the Commonwealth. Governor Warner was elected to the United States Senate in 2008, reelected to another 6-year term a couple of weeks ago. Congratulations. He continues to serve on banking, budget, finance, and intelligence committees. At a time when Washington seems gridlocked by bipartisan politics, he has emerged as a bipartisan leader who's willing to cross the political aisle to bring people together and get things done. I could go on, but you're not here to listen to me. You're here to listen to Senator Warner. So please join me in welcoming Senator Warner.
Thank you, Kate. Thank you. Good morning. Good morning. You know, I am used to being around women. I have a great wife and 3 wonderful daughters, but usually the ratio is 4-to-1, not like this. You know, there are some good things in my job and there's some pretty crummy things in my job. This is a good thing in my job. You look wonderful. Let me start off with thanking Kate again. Isn't ODU a great Virginia institution? If ODU was a stock, this is something that you ought to invest in today. You know, it is both in terms of its reach at the New Strom Entrepreneur Center. I was here when we did the opening of that a couple weeks back. A great, great success story. Thank you again for being partners in this 5th Women's Leadership Summit. I want to also thank, not only a Hampton Roads treasure, but a Virginia treasure, Cathy Lewis. Cathy, thank you. Angela, thank you for those comments. It is not true that I write only dead people. I try to actually write you when you were alive as well, saying you're doing good things. In that spirit, I want to, Kathy went through already the sponsors, but I want to give a special shout out to 4 sponsors who've been with us 4 out of the 5 years. That's Anthem, MasterCard, Dominion, and Genworth. Could you give them one more round of applause? This is done with corporate citizenship support and support from our office that's not done at taxpayer expense. But I want to also give a shout out to both Lou and Denise from my office. My whole office, both the state staff and the Washington staff have been involved. But Lou and Denise, you went the extra mile. So thank you as well for what you've done. Now, this morning and all day long, but I'm going to talk for a few minutes. Not Senate style talk. I'm going to talk actually just for a few minutes. But after me, you're going to hear from our keynoter. And they changed the program. I don't get to introduce her, so I'm going to give her a shout out at the front end here. Connie Schultz is a nationally known Pulitzer Prize winning author. She is published in, you name it, Parade, New York Times, Washington Post. Her voice as a champion of the underdog. It's her voice about talking about social justice issues that sometimes people don't remember. Her voice is one that I think will both inspire you and maybe be willing to say, we need to go the extra mile. And I'm very, very pleased that Connie is here, and it's going to be a real treat for me. And I'm actually going to stay and listen, so, not just like the normal politician kind of come and leave, how they do at church on Sunday. Especially politicians, white politicians in particular, that last Sunday in October. What's particularly bad is the ones who come by and don't even put anything in the collection plate and then leave. But, hey, not my first rodeo, But we have actually 2 United States senators here. Connie is married to someone who is he married well above himself, just as I did, but someone who is a remarkable advocate, someone who represents the state of Ohio, somebody who I'm proud to call a friend, a colleague, but let me assure you, someone who is always on my backside, pushing me to do more to make sure that we don't forget the underdog. That's my dear friend Sherrod Brown. Sherrod, could you stand up too and let us recognize you? You may have heard that I recently went through a job application process. And while the interview was a little touch and go, a little more touch and go than I anticipated, at the end of the day, I got rehired. And I want to just say thank you. Thank you. But that process, any of us who stand for public office, whether it's at the city level or the county level or at the state level, the federal level, you got to go back and think about what brings you to public service. Because I tell you, going through the job application process stinks. For me, and many of you who've attended these conferences in the past have heard my personal story. I'm first in my family to graduate from college, went to public school all my life, got out with a lot of student debt. After a while, decided to go into business and went out and took my whole life savings, $5,000, invested in a little startup business, and in 6 weeks, I helped the business go totally bankrupt. Went into a second business, failed miserably at that, lived out of my car for a while, but got a third try and got involved in the cell phone business. It started Nextel, so I'm also the only politician that says, even when I'm speaking, keep those cell phones on. I love it. Matter of fact, if one of them goes off, you hear an annoying sound, I hear cha-ching, cha-ching, so come on. But I recognize, and what brought me to public service was that in America, everybody ought to get a fair shot. And I can't stand before you without acknowledging that if I hadn't been a white man with the appropriate education, I wouldn't have gotten 3 shots. I wouldn't have gotten 2 shots. I might not even gotten 1 shot. And while in America we can't guarantee everyone's success, we sure as hell ought to be able to guarantee everyone a fair shot. A fair shot. And at the end of the day, that is both not only the morally right thing to do, but it's also the economically right thing to do. In Virginia and America, we are increasingly diverse, racially, ethnically. We got more than 50% women, and thank God more than 50% women voted. But we have to acknowledge that, it's not a fully level playing field still in America. And so the whole notion of today's conference and the theme, Pathways to Success, really is what we ought to be talking about and we ought to be learning from. I look around and saw the list of presenters, successful entrepreneurs, business and community leaders, industry trailblazers, and I can't help but think, if Virginia and America are really going to get it done, we need more. We need more women entrepreneurs. We need more women STEM leaders. We need more women Fortune 500 CEOs. We need more women elected officials, especially where I work. Because not just, again, for what's right, but the data shows women in elected positions, in positions of leadership in business, those companies work better. Those companies get more things done. Those entities are more collaborative. They're less about how do you get to yes, as opposed to like, how can we simply run down the other side? Because time and again, whether it's in family or in business or in life, it's women putting things together and holding things together, even when times are tough. So this is something that is a conference that's really important. And again, it was a cold Saturday morning. Sheridan, Connie, this is not Norfolk weather in November. But I really want to, again, say thank you for all of you who've come out today to say, all right, as Angela said, to kind of love yourself a little more and take a little time for yourself. And I think today will be about that. Couple other quick comments I want to make. How do we make that happen? One, I know there's going to be some forum sessions on this today, but we need to encourage more women entrepreneurs. And you look at the data, and it goes all over the country, but basically 60 to 80% of all the net new jobs that have been created in America in the last 30 years, you know where they come from? They don't come from the Fortune 500 companies, the big guys. They don't come from the small hardware store. They come from startups. So how do we encourage more women to kind of, after at whatever point in life, because women have got more difficult challenges, particularly if you got family, to start up and step up to try to start that business. I've got some legislation that would try to help encourage startups from both a tax standpoint and from a mentoring standpoint. But in a lot of ways, it also starts with communities like this and being able to hear from people who've gone before. Nobody on a startup ever makes it the first time. Nobody ever. I've invested in hundreds of businesses. I've never seen an entrepreneur ever meet their business plan. The ones who are successful are the ones that can adjust. But there are things that we can do from where I sit in Washington to try to help make it easier for startups to kind of get that access. How do we make sure we're increasing access to capital? Again, you go back and look. The Small Business Committee did a recent study and said that women only receive 4.5% of the total amount of small business loans. Think about that for a minute. Fastest growing set of businesses in our country are women-owned businesses. Yet women only getting 4.5% of small business loans? That makes no sense. Women only receive 7% of venture capital funding. I used to be a venture capitalist. And again, 80% of who I saw walk through our door were not representative of this room, but representative of a very different piece of American demographics. We've got to change that. We've got to change that. So, again, what I'm working on, now that I've been rehired, is how do we, particularly in our smaller banks, in our community-based banks, make it a little easier for them to lend to startups, particularly in terms of women? How do we make sure that we use new tools? How many of you have ever heard of crowdfunding? All right. Most of you should hear of crowdfunding. Think about the idea that if you've got a business idea, you ought to be able to put it on the internet and raise money over the internet in a way that might attract a whole different set of investors than kind of the old boy network. This could be an incredibly important tool, and we've got Sheridan and I. Sheridan is actually the head Democrat on the banking committee and a big advocate that says, well, we got to keep pushing the SEC to make sure they get the regs out so we can make this tool available so that we can, again, have access to capital for businesses all across the spectrum. We also got to make sure access to talent. And talent comes, again, from this room by recognizing that in Virginia and America, if we empower all of our communities, that's good for everyone. And again, this face here is the future face of Virginia. It is also why I believe so strongly that we've got to get immigration reform done. To think about the idea that we train some of the world's best and brightest here at ODU, And they come out with a PhD and have a great idea to start up a business, and that young woman then says, because of our crazy immigration laws, can't do it here in Virginia. They don't have to go back to India. They don't have to go back to Poland, because they only have to go up to Canada, because Canada and UK and Australia have all changed their immigration laws to make them rational. We ought to do the same right here in America on immigration reform. But if you're going to get there, you got to have an education. And I talk, as going through this job application process I went on, there are a lot of issues I talk about. I'm kind of obsessed about our nation's debt and deficit. I'm not going to give you that speech this morning. You've heard it before. But this idea of debt, whether it's at the national level or at the individual level, is something we got to deal with. And the issue that I heard time and again, perhaps more than any other issue on the campaign trail, even more than Obamacare, was what about my child or myself taking on student debt? You shouldn't go broke in America if you want to go to college in 2014. But right now, student debt, $1.2 trillion. There's more student debt than there is credit card debt. My personal story, I got out of college and law school with $15,000 worth of debt. It allowed me the opportunity to take those chances and fail and pick up and try again. If I'd gotten out with $40 or $50 or $60,000 worth of debt, I wouldn't be standing here, because I would have never had the courage or the ability to go ahead and take those kind of chances. You look over the last 20 years, direct aid to higher education, straight line down, federal and state level. Cost of higher education, straight line up. How will we fill that gap? By making it really easy to borrow. But unfortunately, when you have that happen, you end up in circumstances that says people coming out of school can't take those chances, can't buy that first house, can't start a family because of crushing amounts of student debt. And there are things that we can do. If you can get a mortgage at 4.25%, why can't you refinance your student debt at those levels as well? Why does college, and Kate, I know that ODU has been on the front line of this, why does college have to be 4 years? Why can't we allow students who qualify to get Pell Grants in high school and knock off a year of college in high school and have that credit fully count? Whether you go to ODU, UVA, or Harvard. Let's make it an easier pathway into college. Maybe you start that first year at the community college and transfer everywhere. Why do we make sure that people are better informed consumers before they go to college? I got a bill with the Republican Senator Marco Rubio called Know Before You Go. Know before you go, because generally, I've got 3 daughters. You take them to college, what do you see? You see the dorm, you see the wonderful eating facilities, you see the sports facility. Nobody talks about the tuition. Nobody talks about the graduation rates. Nobody tells you if you major in art history the way my daughter did, what's your chance of getting a job? So it isn't rocket science, but why don't we have an easy-to-use website like Zillow that says for every college, community college, career and technical education program, data that says if you go, what's your chance of graduating? What's your chance of getting a job if you major in this subject? How much debt you're going to take on? And let's also recognize that 4-year college is not the right choice for every young person. We need an education system in America that says we're going to value the computer technician, the nurse, and the carpenter every bit as much as the doctor and a lawyer. Why don't we also do some other smart things? Again, I got some legislation that says, why don't we cap your student debt at 10% of your income? Income-based repayment, and make that the #1 option for anybody graduating. That would then give that young person, that young woman entrepreneur, the chance to take those chances. And if she fails the first or second or third time before she hits it, she's not going to get crushed during that period. And how about this for a total no-brainer? Even Washington ought to be able to do this. This last one. Why shouldn't we allow every employer and any employee who wants to take up to $5,000 of their salary, if the employee agrees, and allow the employer to apply that directly against your student debt pre-tax? You know, doesn't cost the employer anything else. Good retention tool. And if you can get that money against your student debt pre-tax, and we allow it for tuition, why don't we allow it for student debt? So there are ways that we can wrestle with this issue. Two other comments before we move to our keynote speaker. It's great we talk about student debt. And it's great that we make sure that we get out of college in a way that can allow you to start. But even though, Kate, we're here at ODU, at a great university, we also, as parents, and I say this as a father of 3 daughters from 20 to 25, we also have to face something that has become a crisis in America. And that is the complete upsurge of sexual assault on college campuses. You want to hear something that should be a total embarrassment in America? 1 out of 5 women are sexually assaulted on your college campus. You have a greater risk of being sexually assaulted if you go to college than if you don't go to college in America. And that's crazy. That's crazy. And again, I give ODU a lot of credit. I read in the pilot recently a whole new series of cameras, and there's apps you can use on your mobile device to be able to let people know what's going on. We've all read about the tragedy, Hannah, over at UVA recently. We got to make sure we bring this to an end. And again, it can't all be solved by legislation. It has to be solved by community and policing and universities. But there are things we can do at a national level. With folks like Claire McCaskill and Kirsten Gillibrand, we got bipartisan legislation that says at every university, we got to come clean with data. At every university, there needs to be a confidential advisor, so somebody, male or female, that's sexually assaulted has somebody to turn to in that moment of crisis. Now, I don't get to introduce Connie, so I'm going to let Cathy. No, come back up. But I want to close with this. I just want to close with this. And I am preaching to the choir this morning. If you were up here on a Saturday morning at 8:30, and some of y'all were even here at 7:30, I understand, to sign up. This was free. You didn't have to get here that early. But I am preaching to the choir on this. But it is really important that you're here. One of the things that came out of this last election cycle was, not just in Virginia, but all over America, we had the lowest voter turnout we've had in close to 50 years. And I hear from people all the time, "Oh, Mark, you're a good governor, and I know you're trying hard in the Senate, and I'm going to support you." Although more of you should have got out. I know I'm going to support you, but you know what? You guys aren't ever going to get anything done. So I'm going to stay involved in my community, or my church, or my synagogue, or at my university. And that's good that you do that. But in America, we need a functioning federal government. In America, we still have to deal with problems at the national level. If we don't want the stupidity of sequestration to come back, and in Hampton Roads we'll get hit harder than anywhere else, you got to have a Congress that functions. If we want to make sure that we deal with immigration, or not leaving our kids with $17 trillion in debt and a balance sheet in an America that doesn't have the kind of opportunities and the sense of fair shot that I had growing up, you got to have a functioning federal government. And that means at the end of the day, you got to have people who are actually willing to get to yes. You got to have people that say, well, I may not agree with the president on every issue. I'm not going to start out by simply disrespecting him. And it means acknowledging that neither party has got a monopoly on truth or virtue or patriotism. And that what is the quintessential American part of our DNA is that we see a problem, we get it fixed, and we move on to the next problem. And if we don't get it 100% right, like Obamacare, we come back and fix it. We don't simply relitigate it. So, with your commitment to community, with your commitment to caring about yourself, with this wonderful day we're going to hear in terms of pathway to success, think as well about pathway to success for our country. It's a critical time for us. you've given me the honor of getting rehired and going back and pushing the envelope or kicking some tail up in Washington. I can say this, I'm reelected. I can be non-PC now. Yeah, God willing, that's what I'm going to be able to do. But when I get back up there, Sharon and I are going to think about this 750 strong, powerful women who've got our back to say, go up there and get our country headed in the right direction. Thank you, and God bless you.
So, ladies and gentlemen, please join me in giving a warm Hampton Roads welcome to Connie Schultz.
I thought we were going to be a small, intimate group. And we are. Thank you, Kathy. I got to meet, you find out if people really do walk that talk when you get to meet their children, I have found often. And Kathy's daughter, Anna, is here today. Just got her graduate degree. Where are you, Anna? She's around here somewhere. What a strong young woman. I often say that if our legacy ends with us, it dies with us, right? If we only promote ourselves, we have to carry as we climb. And for many of us in the room, that means young women we meet over time. And for many others in the room, it means our daughters. So I was so impressed. Well, Madam Vice Mayor, I am never going to forget your story, and I'm going to start using it. There she is, laying flat on the slab. I think you probably said casket, but slab's going to work for me. Dee Dee, usually when I sit and listen to somebody do the national anthem, especially if it's a woman, I'm a nervous wreck for her because I'm so afraid she's not going to meet the high notes. But I heard her rehearsing in the ladies' room. And so I wasn't worried at all, and I'd had a chance to meet her. But what I don't think a lot of people in the room know, Dee Dee, is this is a new career for you. You've been doing it just a few years after doing many other things with your life. Also, the First Lady, Kate, I don't know if you all know that she was a nurse for many years before she went into special education. We are just surrounded by women who are remaking themselves. Senator Warner, it is such a delight to be at an event sponsored by a senator that has nothing to do with you. Sharon, and I have to look at the time because I want to make sure we leave some time. We have microphone back there, I think you noticed, and we're going to try to time it so that we have a few minutes to open up the floor for questions. And I'd really like to hear I'd like it better when it's a conversation. Senator Warner, my husband was listening to you, and he turned to me at one point with this look of absolute surprise on his face, and he said, he is so funny. So I think you need to bring your shtick to the Senate because we need a few funny white men there. I was asked to come because I was told that there'd be a few hundred women in the Commonwealth of Virginia, and I've been following your antics for a while, particularly with your state legislature, so it is so nice to be with you in Virginia. Last night, I love hearing how you keep talking about your weather and how bad it is. I left a foot of snow in Cleveland. Yeah. But something happened first thing in the morning. I had to call, I decided to take a cab to the airport because I wasn't sure how I was going to go driving in it because it was still coming down quite a bit. And I got a woman named Donna, who was the dispatcher, and she immediately started talking to me about the weather as we're setting up the time to get picked up for the airport. It was a long day, none of them weather delays, all mechanical delays. So I started at 12:30 and got in around 11 last night. But she was right that it was really bad. And she said, I want you to wear layers when you go out there because it's really cold. And I said, really, how cold is it? She said, look, I took 3 buses to get to work. I know how cold it is. That's exactly right. I heard the gasp. That was my response. And I thought, 3 buses so that she could send a cab to lucky me to go to the airport. And I posted on it on Facebook. How many of you have seen, I have a public Facebook page. I invite you all to come because I love when women participate. And I've been doing it for a number of years now. It's not a fan page, but it's public. And I put up about Donna. I didn't have her name yet. I got her name later, and I'm probably going to write about her. But when I put up my conversation with Donna, I didn't make a statement about, I just said what she said, because you get it, right? Those who get it post. Those who don't look silly when they post. That's how Facebook works. I probably have a little too much fun with the second half sometimes, but What I loved was one woman after another said, make sure you tell her supervisor. Make sure you call and let her supervisor know. This is my experience with women as a newspaper columnist for 12 years now. Women care about so many things. But before I get into that, I do want to thank my husband for being here. He was smiling in the lobby when I got in. I thought he'd be asleep, so bonus points for the hubby. And when Sherrod first ran for the Senate in 2006, I took a leave of absence from my job to avoid a conflict of interest. And my editor at Random House, I'd already published one book. My editor is Kate Medina. By the way, Senator, I don't know if you heard me earlier advising you, whenever Sherrod wants to complain about anything, I remind him what my editor said about our lives. No whining on the yacht. It shuts down many an argument, let me tell you. For both of us. We do it to each other, which is very annoying, by the way, because it was all mine, I thought. But when Sherrod was decided to run for the Senate, our mutual friend Anna Quinlan, who also has the same editor at Random House, called the editor and said, well, if Sherrod Brown's running for the Senate, I know whose book I want to read, and it ain't the candidates. So we decided I was going to write this book before we ever knew if he could win. I think in the beginning, only family members thought he was going to win against an incumbent, but he did. It was a great race. And we kept trying to figure out a title. So the first time in Cleveland, when Sherrod was an announced candidate and brought me in the room, Cleveland, where I had been working as a columnist already, Cleveland, where I had been a journalist all my adult life, I got introduced as his lovely wife. And Sherrod Brown's here with his lovely wife, and I turned to Sherrod and I said, oh, she did not just say that. And Sherrod, ever the devoted husband, said, oh, I'm sure it'll never happen again. The 50th time, I was introduced as his lovely wife, Candy. And I just kind of I'm saying, not my name, hello, not my name. Nobody cares what my name is. And it was an amazing experience to have this happen at this point in my career. I was 45 years old when I married Sherrod. When you are the wife of a candidate, and this was in 2006, so we're talking recent history, I was finding it rather remarkable the number of men who would meet me and suggest that I change my name. And because I kept the name Schultz. And at first I thought I'd just have a little fun. I remember this elderly gentleman at a railroad track. So one Sunday morning I said, I'm Connie Schultz. He said, I know, and you should change your name. And I said, but I've always been called Connie. Sometimes it's a lot of fun to pretend you don't get the point. But it finally, and so I kept trying to excuse it, laugh it off. And then I went to a chicken dinner to speak for my husband down in southern Ohio. And a man got up, one of the local activists, and he gets up and he says, well, Sherrod Brown's wife's here, but she refuses to change her name, so here she is. See, that's what the staff looked like. In the beginning of the campaign, they must have had 18 people following me because they're always afraid of what I was going to say. And I walked up, and I looked at their faces, and I guess I knew what my face looked like by the look on their faces, because they all looked scared. What he didn't know is that my father had just died of a heart attack 2 weeks earlier. And I realized that I had done this the wrong way. There was no way I could go simply from being a woman paid to give her opinion to a wife going around spouting her husband's views everywhere she went. That just wasn't going to work for me, and that's why I was so uncomfortable. So I got up and I said to there was about 70 people in the room, I said, he's right, I haven't changed my name. My name is Connie Schultz, and I've been spending way too much time making excuses for it, trying to explain it. I was 45 when I married Sherrod, I was already a columnist. That's not why I haven't changed my name. I want to tell you about Chuck and Janie Schultz. My father, Chuck Schultz, worked for 36 years in a job he hated every day he was in it, according to him. He was maintenance. He worked in maintenance for the local power plant, Cleveland Electric Illuminating. And a moment I have never forgotten that it drives much of my work. Our ritual, I grew up in Ashtabula, Ohio, little town, small working class town east of Cleveland on Lake Erie. And in the summer months, our routine was Dad was one of those guys who showered at the plant, came home and his hair was always real shiny with the Brill cream in it. You could smell the old spice. Isn't it funny how you just have these memories, right? And he was a big old burly guy. And his ritual would be to sit on the front step with whatever beer was on sale, Stroh's, Rolling Rock. He liked Schlitz because it looked like Schultz. It was great. You get your fame where you find it. And while my mom sat there and made supper, and I was the oldest of 4, he had 3 girls and a son, and I would play catch with my little brother Chucky, and he would kind of give us some tips while we were waiting for Mom to fix supper. And I was a sophomore in high school, and I was playing catch with Chucky, and all of a sudden Dad just shook his head. And I thought I had thrown the ball wrong, and I said, "What is it, Dad?" And he didn't even look at us. He just shook his head and said, "You could teach a monkey to do what I do." That was my dad. That's what he thought of what he did for a living. It was only after he died, a few years later, I got an invitation to visit the plant where he had worked because they were rehabbing it. And one of his former supervisors took me around, and I would see these big pieces of equipment, rusted equipment, and I'd say, "Did my dad?" And he said, "Yes, your father did this. Yes, your father did that." Finally, he turned to me about after the 6th time, and he said, "Honey, your dad was in maintenance. He could do every job in this plant." That's what maintenance meant. I have a 12-pound wrench that they gave me that my dad used to use all the time, which helped me understand those muscles, and the plant helped me understand his rage. So that was my father. My mother, Janie Schultz, was 4 feet 11, but she always wore a big old beehive because she thought it made her look taller. It did not. But it was great. She was the awe of the neighborhood because every holiday they'd do something different. Like her hairdresser Gary for Easter one year made it look like an Easter basket with a little bird's egg there. And the neighbor kids would just line up and stare at Mrs. Schultz. So Mom was one of those ladies who did everything with her kids. We used to play pickup softball in the neighborhood, and she'd come out and she'd play ball, and she loved playing ball with all of us. So when I'm a sophomore in college, she calls me, because I always played on boys' teams. We had no girls' teams in Ashtabula County back then. And she called me, I was at Kent State University, and I was coming home for the summer. It'd be the last summer I'd come home. And she calls me about 6 weeks before I get there, and she goes, "Connie, guess what? They're going to have a women's softball league. I think we should be on the same team." Every 21-year-old girl's dream. But I didn't feel like I could say no to her. So here we are with Mom on the same team. Now, Mom, as I said, was rather short. We were never allowed to say that. We called her petite. So between the beehive and the pedal pushers, because she couldn't wear the pants, they were too long, so she wore pedal pushers, nobody could find her strike zone. She'd be... So over and over again, she'd get walked. But all she wanted to do was slide. And we had to keep saying, "Ma, you don't slide into first. You run through first. If you can get all the way around, you can slide into home." So every chance she got, she would slide into home, and immediately the beehive would shift. But the crowd knew to wait for it. Because she'd stand up, she'd go like that, and she'd say, "Aquanet." I can't tell you how wonderful it is to hear you laugh about my mom. You would have loved her. My mom, when I was a junior in high school, went back to work as a nurse's aide because even on my dad's union wages, union benefits, they had 4 kids. And there was no way they were going to afford to send me to college if Mom didn't go back to work. So for a lot of years, she worked as a nurse's aide. She was one of those women who wear sweaters even in the summer from the bruises on her arms because she worked in the psych ward most of the time. Yeah. And then the last few years, she worked for hospice. She was a hospice home care worker. And as I said, her name was Janie, and her reputation at hospice was when Janie showed up, people lived longer. Because she was one of those women who would come in and sit with people all day long and help them, and she was 8-hour-a-day shift, and she would cook for them, and she would sit and go through their photo albums, and she'd listen to their stories. My mom died at the age of 62 from a lung disease. She had never smoked a day in her life. We came to believe that it was the asbestos exposure, probably from my dad's work clothes. At her calling hours, there were more than 800 people who showed up. And I kept hearing about, I met her mechanic. I met the person who always had to hem her pants. I met all these different people who knew her in different walks of life, and so many family members of patients whom she had taken care of. And I always think it was one of the saddest days of my life. But I'll never forget a colleague of mine. His name is Tom Farron, and he was a columnist at the time, and he too was very short, petite. I don't think you call men petite though, right? So let's not do that. Don't tell him I said that. And he waited, he said, 2 hours to get up there. And I'm standing there, and I'm with my siblings and my dad, who's just a wreck. And Tom said, Connie, that is the longest line I have ever been in for a wake. I thought for sure by the time I got to the porch, there would be a sign that said, you have to be this tall to enter. I talked about how my dad drives a lot of my work, but here's why my mother has had such an impact on my life and why I want you to know more about her, because graduated from high school, that was it. But she used to tell her daughters, don't marry him until you see how he treats the waitress. What she meant, of course, was how we treat the people we are allowed to mistreat is the measure of who we are. And that was my mother. And I think about that so often. When you're a columnist, you're always looking for material. Your life is material. And when you fly a lot, you can get upgraded sometimes. I always feel guilty when I'm in it. This is the working class kid in me. I always want to say, I didn't pay for this seat. I just fly a lot. Nobody wants to hear your explanations. And because everybody's walking past you when you're sitting there, and I just feel so uncomfortable. And I'm often the only woman still in first class when I'm traveling. And I remember, this is when I just channel my mother over and over again, because I was in first class flying to Texas with a man sitting next to me with a belt buckle the size of my head. And I kept thanking the woman as she was bringing things, the water. And then finally he turned to me and said, you don't have to say thank you to her so much. And I said, well, I'm doing it for both of us. So much we have to explain, don't we? So much. Never ends. One of the things I love about being a columnist and hearing so much from women is because I know that women care about justice. Justice in the weeds, to the bone, individual justice. And a story I like to share is one of the columns I wrote in 2004 about a tip jar. Sheridan and I had gone to a charitable event, and there was, it's one of those party centers. So there are all these women in middle age or older waiting on us. None of them are full-time. None of them have benefits. And then one of those women has to sit behind the coat check counter as you go to get your coats at the end of the evening. And it was a big crowd. So I'm watching this woman as people are giving, and she just looks exhausted. But I noticed this giant, and it was like a jug, glass tip jar, had a big sign that said tips, and it had $5 and $10, lots of singles. I mean, it was almost full. And so when I got up there, I said, you look like you'd like to get home. She said, I am so tired. And I looked at the jar, and I pointed to it, and I said, well, at least you get these. And she said, oh, we don't get the tips. Right? And I said, what? And she said, we don't keep the tips. I said, well, who keeps the tips? She said, management keeps the tips. Well, I called that company on Monday. And the first manager I got was just yelling at me. She said, Connie, nobody cares who keeps the tips. I said, oh, I think they do. And she said, nobody's even asked that. And I said, you know why? Because it says tips. Everybody's assuming that the people... Well, in my business, you're onto something when you get a second call back, and it's from two vice presidents on speakerphone, and you didn't call them. And you really know you're onto something when the first words out of one of their mouths is, Connie, there's no story here. How come they're so dumb and you're so smart? How does that happen? Why aren't we running the world? Well, I told these two gentlemen that if they wanted to change our policy right then and there, I would write that they have seen the light, the arc of justice, the whole thing. They said, no, nobody cares. So what I did is I wrote a column basically the way I just told you. I described what happened, and I said at the end, they said you don't care who keeps the tips. I think they're wrong. What do you think? They changed their policy the next morning by 11 o'clock on the most popular radio station in Cleveland. And you know why? It wasn't just that people were calling into the radio show, all these women, and it wasn't just because of all the women writing me. Women were calling and canceling bar and bat mitzvahs, wedding receptions, women, because who plans all those things? Yes, thank you. Which brings me to, so you came today with your busy lives. We've all been acknowledging that, and there's a reason for it. By the way, I forgot to mention, Kathy, it's not very often that a senator, any politician, calls a journalist a treasure, so I hope you're going to hang on to that one. how often do we take the time to take care of ourselves? I mean, there's a reason all of us are saying that, because we know how rare it is. A book I loved, I first read it in my early 30s by Mary Catherine Baton. It's called Composing a Life. I had to think about it. I think it's in like its 14th printing now. And the criticism of it was that it looked at lives of affluent women, privileged women, and I agree with that. But what I loved about it is it looked at the lives of 6 women and the trajectory of their lives. I've often said the trajectory of my career would look like popcorn in a hot skillet. I did not go from here to there. You know, I went all over the place. I went to law school, dropped out, even though I was doing well, married my law professor. Do not do that, young women in the room, ever. But I have 2 wonderful children. How many are single moms in this room? Wow, look at that. Yeah. How many are, let me ask it this way. How many of you are here because you're trying to do something different, or you're trying to imagine something different for your life? Yeah, that's pretty much all of us, right? One of the conversations we had before I came out here was how women sometimes, even if we're included at the table, we don't feel like we're being asked to participate. Yeah. I mean, I always think of what it is important to be at the table. Our dear friend Cecile Richards, head of Planned Parenthood, always says, if you're not at the table, you are on the menu, right? But the thing that's important about this notion of being at the table but not being asked to participate, see, that's the thing. We don't wait for the invitation. If we waited for the invitation, we still wouldn't have the right to vote. And I think of a moment in our own newsroom several years ago with a dear friend of mine who, in newsrooms you typically, well, back in the day when they were full, you had a bunch of assistant city editors. And there was one woman who was a dear friend of mine and a bunch of men on the city desk. And I walk in one morning and I can tell she's very upset. And she's standing there just fuming. And I said, what's the matter? And she points to a huddle of the city editors, the other assistant city editors. She goes, I'm trying to figure out why I'm not in that meeting. And I put my hand on her back and said as gently as I could, I'm trying to figure out why you're waiting for the invitation. I always wanted to be a columnist. I had one editor after another tell me I didn't have it in me. And it was really exciting when I finally got it because a woman advocated for me to get it. And I remember calling my dad. He was still alive. My mom was already gone. I was 45 years old, getting to be a columnist. I said, Dad, I got it. I'm going to be a columnist. He didn't miss a beat. He says, finally, you're going to get paid for what you've been throwing around for free for 45 years. One of the things I noticed pretty early on in my career as a columnist, I do a lot more public speaking, and you'd have these large rooms of women, and you'd have that microphone, and inevitably some woman would get up and say, how do you deal with all the negative reaction you get? All the hate that's out there, because it is quite clear, as my family often acknowledges, that I do bring out the worst in a certain percentage of a certain kind of man. I want that in my obit. But when I first started answering that question, I would try to just dismiss it. You know, I'd say, oh, you know, yeah, I don't let it bother me. I thought that, but that wasn't true. And it was a disservice to every woman who was trying to figure out how she could have the courage to speak her mind, right? Speak your mind, even if your voice shakes. Maggie Kuhn from the Great Panthers. So I finally started telling the truth. Of course it bothers me. They'd even make fun of my pug. I had a pug, and they'd say, oh, she looks just like her pug. That's so unfair to that dog. And they would go after my family. And I have decided, I was at Oswego University about 3 weeks ago for a summit with a bunch of men and me. And Charlie Rose was there and Kenoletta. And I said to the audience, because there were a lot of young women in the audience, I said, you know what I've learned? Because one of the women raised the issue. God, they go after women. They attack us so personally. I said, you know what? If I write my opinion and you go after my weight, my gender, or my appearance, I win. I win. So one of the quotes I've had on my desktop computer for years is from the African-American poet Lucille Clifton. She has since died. And she said it in an interview actually at the Plain Dealer where I was working once. What they call you is one thing. What you answer to is something else. So when Rush Limbaugh called me a ditz and called me stupid on the air, and you always know that's going to happen because you get almost immediately 300 emails, and they're all calling you names, just spelling it differently. And you know it's because Rush Limbaugh's called you a name again, right? And I thought, what am I going to do? You know, I've tried to deal with this other ways, and then I thought about what my mother said. Good old mom. When a boy starts calling you names, It's because he's got a crush on you. So that's what I wrote. And he's never talked about me again. I was right. I write for Parade magazine. I write personal essays for Parade, but I also write a nationally syndicated column, and it's mostly about politics. I'm sure it will not surprise you to know that I'm a liberal. I know not all of you are, but we're all here because we're women and we know we can disagree on some things and still have a conversation. This seems to confound some men. My favorite email from the 2012 presidential primary came from a man in Alabama, a reader, because what happens is a lot of these papers will run my political column on the op-ed page, and there I am in Parade the same day, right? And he wrote to me and he says, I do not understand how a lady who can be so sweet to her puppy can be so mean to Rick Santorum. And I wrote him back and I said, well, you know, women are complicated. We can hold more than one thought at the same time. We can think about the presidential elections and make sure the puppy goes out and does his business. And I loved his response. He wrote back and just said, well, now you're sounding like my wife. You see how you just have to have fun with them. Because when Sherrod first got elected to the Senate, all of a sudden I have these men writing to me that I can no longer be a columnist. The same columnist I'd been when he was in the House, right, and won the Pulitzer. But suddenly he's a senator, and people knew who he was, and he was showing up on TV a lot. And I finally figured out the response to men who would say, you know, you should give up this job because your husband's a senator now. And I would write back and say simply, you know, I think you're confused about what marriage does to a woman. Marriage does not suck the brain out of a woman and render her incapable of an independent thought. And I hope we've cleared that up for you. Now, you're a lot of fun. You're a lot of fun. I wish we had this every week. Now, there's a question I want you to ask yourself all through this day. And it comes from a dear friend of mine who just shared it with me recently, my friend Gailey McCracken. Gailey McCracken was a graphics artist and a stay-at-home mom. We knew each other because we used to volunteer for newsletters and stuff before I went off to work for newspapers, and she was a graphic designer, but she always wanted to be a doctor. So at age 40, she went to medical school. I know. And at age 62, she's got this incredible practice full of women. She's taking care of women. She'd want me to tell you two things. Have you had your mammogram in the last 12 months? I don't hear a universal yes. Okay. You've got to do that. Did you get your flu shot? Yeah. All right. And remember, take care of your heart. Women die from heart disease, more than we ever thought. But the thing that Gailey told me just 2 weeks ago, she went to a conference, because she goes to these holistic conferences, because as women know, you got to treat everything, right? We are not just a body part, gentlemen. And we'll teach. We'll just keep teaching, educating. She said, the question I'm asking myself every day now is, who am I? Who am I? And it's not this simply philosophical. I thought of it when I was meeting, I had a little talk earlier this week with a group of grant makers. These are men and women, mostly women, who write grants for all these different organizations in Cleveland. And they're all the do-good stuff, right? They're helping the children, helping women relocate, helping women in shelter. And I said, you know, when's the last time you asked yourself, who am I? Not as in, what is my name? Why do I do what I do? What do I stand for? What do I want to do? What would best express at this point in my life my values? What are my values? So that's what I mean when I want you to keep thinking about, who am I? Because the look on their faces when I said that, you could see a lot of them, it had been a long time since they talked about that. Maybe they never had, which gets me to my next point. You have got people in your family who love you and think they know you. They mean the best, but as I often tell writers at writers' workshops, a lot of women want to write, scared to death. And I said, let me say something about all these people we love. Family is the enemy. Because family is the one who will say, You're how old and now you're going to do this? You're going to sing now? You're going to go to special ed after all these years as a nurse? Well, that's what you get from family, unfortunately. They think they're protecting you, right? So that's the gnat on your shoulder. That's what I always call it. Flick that off. Know who you are and know what you want to do. And here's why that matters. Because then, once you've figured it out, you can start telling your story. And you have stories to tell. I find it so interesting in my career. I have yet to find the man. I've been a journalist for more than 30 years. And if I call a man and say, I want to write about something he's doing or who he is, I have yet to meet the man who says, oh, you don't want to write about me. Not once. Ever. Women regularly, they'll maybe want to name all the people who've made their lives possible. This is what women do. That's a wonderful thing about us. However, Vice Mayor, when you think about it, Madam Vice Mayor, look what you do for a living. And yes, you are married to an undertaker, but look what you're doing with your life. I wonder how often you actually tell your story and explain why you do what you do. This is what I would ask of you, because there are so many people in your lives who need to know why you're here today. What drove you to this? It's a perfect opportunity when you say you came to this to talk about more than simply what you showed up for, who you heard speak. You can talk about why you're doing, and write it out for yourself. Write it out for family members long after you're gone. My mother left all her journals to me. And I'm working on my first novel for Random House, and let me tell you, there is a woman in that book who I didn't know until I started reading my mother's journals. So I have one more request, and then let's open the floor. I want to talk about mentoring very quickly, because all across the country, I hear from younger women who say, we're not doing it enough. We got to carry as we climb, right? And I do say to women my age, look, we don't have their midriffs. They don't have our wisdom. It's a trade-off, apparently. I must be really wise. But I don't think it's simply about women feeling threatened by younger women. I just don't buy that. I think part of it is a lot of us don't even think of ourselves as experts. We don't think of ourselves as fonts of wisdom, as people who've had these experiences. Think of the trajectory of your lives. Think of all you always were told that you should know by the time you graduate from college what you're going to do at age 50. How many of you could have predicted the first decade of your life? That's who we are. And that's how strong we are. And that's a lot of experience in that. I was just talking to my daughter a couple of days yesterday. I called her for this speech, and she's 27, working in Providence, Rhode Island. Just took a new job. She's a program manager for Mayor Bloomberg, one of his foundational programs there. And she's nervous. And I said, do you have any women you're talking to there? And she goes, Mom, I could really use a few female thought partners, she called them. And I said, well, I'm here. And she goes, Mom, it's the same reason I don't ask you if I look good in something. And I got that immediately. She's a strong woman, but she needs women other than her mother. So I will end with one more story about a very strong woman. And let's take 2 or 3 questions at least, please. I would love to hear what's on your minds. Maybe 3 or 4. We'll see until I get ordered off. And it's about Sharon's mother, Emcee Campbell Brown. Emcee Campbell Brown was determined, after a terminal diagnosis, to live to see President Barack Obama inaugurated. And she watched it on a little television set from her hospice bed in her living room. She was an amazing woman from Mansfield, Georgia, who married a doctor and moved to Mansfield, Ohio. She never lost her accent. It's the first time I ever heard my name in 8 syllables. Connie. In the last weeks of her life, we rotated and helped to take turns to care for her. And at one point, she turned to Sharon and said, oh, I would love to hear the Lutheran hymn, Beautiful Savior. And Sharon, being the youngest, has never stopped trying to please his mother. So he walked into the library, brought out the hymnal. I don't know how many of you have ever heard his voice on television. He talks like this, and he sings like this. You know I love your voice, honey. And it was quite a moment for me to sit at the dining room table, because it was just one long room, and watch my husband hunched over there singing 3 verses to his mother. The very next day, she said, oh, Sharon, I wish our friend Janine were here to sing Beautiful Savior. And Sharon said, but Mother, I sang that to you yesterday. Do you remember? And she said, I know, honey. You're better in a group. Aren't we all? Let's open the floor for a few. Okay. We have time for 2 questions. Now, I know this room is full of energy. Surely we have 2. There are 2. I see one walking up. Oh, you're going to sit down? No, I think you have to. If you don't have any, that's fine. That would be a first. I'll go home and say, wow, in Virginia. Are you going to ask a question? What is it with these people standing up and not asking questions? Okay, yes. I was teasing you. That's great. Yes. Ma'am, could you go over to the microphone so we can hear you, please? All right, I'll repeat it. What would I say to somebody who started college, left, and is afraid to go back to pursue her goals? I would say the number 1 enemy of every woman in this room is fear. And I get it. I understand. Look, I was 36 when I stopped. I used to write at my kitchen table, freelance pieces. I was 36 years old when I went to my first newspaper job. I was scared out of my mind. I know the fear of being surrounded by people who have been used to being in a newsroom for decades. And they were wondering, why did they hire this woman? Almost 10 years to the day is when I won the Pulitzer Prize. Women can do anything. You did graduate.
In 2002. But it's been begging me for the last month to go back and pursue my goals as a judge, serving the Lord.
Well, you know what? That's a really good point. So she graduated in 2002 with honors, but she's really when you ask yourself, who am I? Inside, I am a judge. I want to go back and be a judge. I would listen to that voice. Many of you probably did this with your kids. I used to tell my children when they didn't know what decision to make, to get it quiet, get still in a room, and see what your stomach tells you. And that's the advice you follow. And then I always remember this, and I've had to follow my own advice many times that I gave my kids. Act brave, and the courage will come. All right. Thank you.